Speaker, the petrochemical and oil and gas industries are vital to coastal communities across our United Kingdom, in Teesside and in Scotland. Can the Minister confirm that this government is committed to supporting our petchem sector and further oil and gas exploration in the North Sea, which will inevitably help us achieve net zero, not hinder it?
Minister.
Yes, indeed I can. The government is committed to deliver a North Sea transition deal, which will be a global exemplar of how a government can work with the offshore oil and gas industry in partnership to achieve a managed energy transition. This deal between the UK government and the oil and gas industry will support workers, businesses and the supply chain through this transition by harnessing the industry's existing capabilities, infrastructure and private investment potential.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government's multi-million-pound investment in the fishing industry will benefit coastal communities right across the United Kingdom, from Cornwall to Scotland. Will my right honourable friend agree with me that only by boosting coastal communities and spreading opportunity to every single corner of our country can we succeed in our mission to improve the lives of everybody in our great nation?
Minister.
Indeed I can. The government has gone well beyond its manifesto commitment to replace EU funding by investing an additional £100 million over the next 3 years for these transformative seafood projects that will rejuvenate the industry and our coastal communities. Levelling up is about helping communities across the UK, and that means building back better, spreading opportunity, improving public services and helping restore and celebrate pride in our coastal communities.
Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The world-leading European Marine Energy Centre in Stromness was developed as a consequence of access to EU Interreg funding, money to which we no longer have access. Does the Minister agree with me that the UK Shared Prosperity Fund should be the source of replacement funding for organisations like EMEC that no longer have access to Interreg funding? And what is the Scotland Office doing to make that case within government?
Minister.
Well, I'm very pleased to say I had the pleasure of visiting Stromness last summer and saw for myself the huge potential that Orkney has to lead the country in renewable energy. I continue to speak with the leader of Orkney Isles Council to explore all the ways that we can help fund these exciting projects.
Liz Chapman.
Many coastal communities, including Dunfermline and West Fife, benefit from improved coastal shipping. What actions has the Secretary of State taken to assist introducing a direct ferry service from Scotland to critically important export markets in Europe?
Minister.
Well, I was very pleased to reply to a debate that the Honourable Gentleman and other colleagues spoke in a couple of weeks ago on exploring the potential for restoring the Rosyth to Zeebrugge link, which for commercial reasons ceased operating a few years ago. I think there are lots of potentials for reopening that. It primarily is a matter for the Scottish Government, but I'm happy to work with him and his colleagues to explore all these opportunities.
The Minister, Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The ScotWind allocation announced last week has the opportunity to create thousands of jobs in Scotland. The reality is that over their time in office, the SNP has created lots of highly skilled jobs. It's just they're not in Scotland. They're in China, Poland, Portugal and elsewhere. The Scottish Government failed to put in place sufficient demands for local procurement as part of awarding the contract. It's particularly disappointing for coastal communities who can see offshore wind turbines being installed, but they can't see the jobs. What discussion has the Minister had with the Scottish Government about ensuring that the supply chain for ScotWind creates jobs in Scotland and across the UK?
Minister.
Well, I agree with the basic point the Honourable Lady is making, and if I can reference back to the answer I gave to the Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland, if you look at the whole piece of renewable energy, there are enormous opportunities to develop that technology in Scotland through our contracts for difference round, which is as big as all the other rounds put together. There is huge investment going in offshore wind and in tidal, and I will continue to explore every every avenue to make sure that this country is able to secure the lion's share of that industrial capacity.
Emily's waving.
Yes. Susan Webb.
Question number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, 8 projects in Scotland have received a share of over £170 million from round 1 of the Levelling Up Fund. These projects will create new jobs, boost training, grow productivity and deliver tremendous economic benefit to Scotland.
Mr. Speaker, with all the news on the Levelling Up White Paper today, could my right honourable friend update the House on progress towards launching the fund's second round, as I know within many bidders in Scotland, as there will be in my constituency of Stourbridge, where we are keen to move forward with a bid to regenerate life.
Mr. Speaker, unsuccessful applicants who passed the gateway stage will be offered feedback to support future bids, and they will also be encouraged to reapply. Round 2 of the Levelling Up Fund is due to open in the spring of this year, and there will be more information shared in due course.
Davis Jones.
Mr. Speaker, I feel for the Minister for having to come to the dispatch box to defend his government's appalling record on spending for the devolved nations. Their broken promises on fully replacing EU funds look to set Wales over £1 billion over the next few years. So can the Minister confirm exactly how the government plan on plugging this gap? The Shared Prosperity Fund will see all of the devolved nations lose out on vital funding, and it is simply not good enough.
Well, Mr. Speaker, to be absolutely clear, regarding funding to the devolved administrations, the first point I'd make to the Honourable Lady is that the settlement for Scotland this year, £41.6 billion, is an increase of £4 billion. It's the highest settlement the Scottish Government have received since 1998, so since devolution began. And regarding the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, the ERDF and ESF funds are being absolutely replaced with no reduction whatsoever, as per our manifesto commitment.
David Dewitt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can my honourable friend explain to the House or inform us of what engagement he's had and other UK government departments have had with the Scottish Government and in particular local authorities in Scotland to ensure that levelling up is truly a levelling up exercise across the whole United Kingdom?
Tuesday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, as my honourable friend knows, we have had, when he was in the Scotland office with me, we've had a lot of engagement with Scottish local authorities, and we have been very clear that we are going to deliver the levelling up money and work with those local authorities to practice real devolution.
Ray Morris.
Number 7, sir.
Minister.
The Union Connectivity Review recognised the importance of the A1 and recommended that the UK Government should seek to work with the Scottish Government to develop an assessment of the East Coast Road and Rail Corridor. We will respond to the UCR and publish that in due course.
Thank the Minister for that response, but on the day that the Levelling Up agenda has been published, can he tell the House what steps he's taking to devolve powers and finance to the northern region so that we can strengthen ties with the Holyrood government independent of Westminster, and so increase rail capacity, increase trade and opportunities for business?
Minister.
Well, first of all, I should say I know how passionate the honourable gentleman is about transport matters. I had the pleasure of serving with him on the Transport Select Committee for a number of years. I think if he reads through the Levelling Up White Paper, which came out today, I appreciate it's quite a weighty tome, so may not have had a chance to digest it all yet, but he will see in that the measures to which he's referring. That we can encourage better connectivity between the different economic centres of the UK. And I would be absolutely delighted to see a strengthening of that corridor between Scotland and the north east of England.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 9, please, sir. 9.
Secretary of State.
My office and I have regular discussions with the Ministry of Defence on all matters relating to defence in Scotland, including defence investment with industry and commerce in Scotland, which totalled almost £2 billion in 2020-2021.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scotland is home to the Royal Navy Submarine Service, including our essential independent nuclear deterrent that protects the whole of the UK. As President Putin continues to escalate his military posture and the aggression on the Ukrainian border. And let's be clear, it is President Putin escalating this and not the Russian people. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that our commitment to defence investment in Scotland, including Trident, is important, indeed vital, to Scotland's security as part of the UK and as part of NATO?
Order. I need to finish these questions. Please. It's in good order that you want to hear your own Secretary of State. Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, you won't be surprised to hear that I completely agree with my honourable friend. The UK's independent nuclear deterrent, which is Trident based at the HMS Naval Base Clyde, exists to deter the most extreme threats to the United Kingdom, but also to our NATO allies. Our nuclear deterrent is the ultimate assurance against current and future threats and remains essential for as long as the global security situation demands.
Alan Smith, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 10, please.
This government has consistently said the best way to support people's living standards is through good work, better skills and higher wages. Our plan for jobs is working. The economy is growing and unemployment is low. The national living wage and universal credit taper and allowance changes are putting more money in people's pockets.
Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK energy market is demonstrably broken. Surely that's of concern to all of us on all sides of the House. Now, I'm particularly concerned about rural energy prices and disparities between urban and rural areas. Competition law and energy law are reserved to this place. Would the Minister support my call for an investigation into uncompetitive energy practices? And if he won't, would he care to come to the city of Stirling and explain to the people of Stirling and Scotland how the UK energy market is working for them?
Minister.
Well, first of all, can I welcome the honourable gentleman's home city and its City of Culture bid. And I'm always happy to come and visit Stirling. In fact, I believe I'm coming up in the next couple of weeks to visit. I'm very happy to meet him to discuss the measures he refers to. But I would point out that energy prices are rising globally. That is a consequence of the coronavirus restrictions easing and demand coming back, together with other geopolitical factors. So I would put the points he raises in that global context.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I wish to make a statement about the House practices regarding accusing members of lying or deliberately misleading the House. I recognise there are frustrations around the House's practices. Firstly, let me say that there are means by which accusations of lying may be brought before the House, including by means of a substantive motion. The Scottish National Party did so on their opposition day in November. However, members may not accuse each other of lying or deliberately misleading the House unless such a substantive motion is under consideration. Erskine May is clear that it is to preserve the character of parliamentary debate, which I take to mean to stop it descending into fruitless cycles of accusation and counter-accusation. May I also say that expressions when used in respect of the members which are regarded with particular seriousness, generally leading to prompt intervention from the Chair and often a requirement on a member to withdraw the words, include charges uttering deliberate falsehoods. It is important to stress context. Similar words said in different proceedings might attract a different response from the Chair, depending on the subject being debated, tone and other considerations, but in general the Chair will not tolerate accusations of lying or deliberately misleading the House. That is the long-standing practice of the House, as set out in Erskine May and followed by successive speakers and deputy speakers. Of course, long-standing practices may change. For example, if the House decided it wanted a different approach, perhaps informed by the Procedure Committee inquiry, but it's not for me to change the practice unilaterally. Therefore, I ask members to respect this approach. I know feelings run high on important issues we discuss, But there are plenty of ways of making strong feelings felt within the rules and without placing the Chair in the invidious position of having to order members to withdraw on seeking their suspension. Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I'd like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. I now call Esther McVeigh.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this Sunday, Her Majesty the Queen will become the first British monarch to celebrate a Platinum Jubilee. While it is a moment for national celebration, it will be a day of mixed emotions for Her Majesty, as, of course, the day also marks 70 years since the death of her beloved father, George VI. I know that the whole House will want to join me in thanking Her Majesty for her tireless service. We look forward to celebrating her historic reign with a series of national events in June. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Esther McVeigh.
On Monday, the Secretary of State for Health said mandatory vaccinations would be subject to a consultation. So can the Prime Minister make it clear, unequivocally, no ifs, no buts, no qualifications, that mandatory vaccinations for NHS staff will be abandoned? Will he also make it clear that is true for care workers as well, many of whom have already lost their jobs? So what support will the government be giving to get those care workers back into the care sector, and will those who've lost their jobs get compensation?
Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend very much for her thoughtful work on this. I want to stress that vaccines remain our best line of defence, and I do think that NHS staff and all those who work in the care sector have a professional responsibility to get vaccinated, Mr. Speaker. But as my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, told the House on Monday, given the difference between Omicron and Delta, it is right, and she is right, that we revisit the balance of risks and opportunities, Mr. Speaker. The Health Secretary has said we'll launch a consultation, and subject to the responses and the will of this House, Mr. Speaker, the government will revoke the regulations.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And following your opening remarks, I just want to say to the members opposite, theirs is the party of Winston Churchill. Our parties stood together as we defeated fascism in Europe. Now their leader stands in the House of Commons parroting the conspiracy theories of violent fascists to try and score cheap political points. He knows exactly what he is doing. It's time to restore some dignity. Mr. Speaker, one of the most absurd claims made on behalf of Operation Save Big Dog is the Prime Minister and the Chancellor writing in the Sunday Times that they are the tax-cutting Conservatives. Why do these alleged tax cutters keep raising taxes on working people?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, on his first point, I don't want to make heavy weather of this, but I am informed that in 2013 the right honourable gentleman apologised and took full responsibility for what had happened on his watch, and I think, Mr. Speaker, that was the right thing to do. And Mr. Speaker, on what we're doing to tackle cost of living and taxation, Mr. Speaker, our COVID recovery plan is absolutely vital in helping people with the cost of living, lifting up universal credit payments, Mr. Speaker, by cutting the tax that people effectively pay, lifting the living wage, Mr. Speaker, helping councils with another £500 million for those who are facing particular hardship, Mr. Speaker. But what we're also doing, and this is absolutely vital, is increasing the number of high-wage, high-skill jobs in this country. 420,000 more on the payroll than there were before the pandemic began, because we've had the fastest exit from COVID of any European economy, Mr. Speaker, because we had the fastest vaccine and booster rollout.
Mr. Speaker, it's not just the national insurance rise. Thresholds for income tax frozen. A stealth tax on working people. The threshold for tuition fees frozen. A stealth tax on working people. Local authorities forced to increase council tax. A stealth tax on working people. You can be as stealthy as you like, but you can't hide reality. We have the highest tax burden for 70 years during the middle of an inflation crisis. So I ask the Prime Minister again, why do he and the Chancellor keep raising taxes on working people?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, what we are doing is helping people with the cost of living, cutting taxes for those on universal credit, Mr. Speaker, as I have said, helping people with the cost of their fuel, Mr. Speaker, with the cold weather payments, the warm homes payments, Mr. Speaker, doing all the things that this country would expect, lifting the living wage, which this party, Mr. Speaker, introduced. This party, this government, has increased by the record amount, Mr. Speaker. And above all, the most important thing that we are doing is helping people into work. 500,000 people off welfare into work under our Way to Work scheme. More people in work now than before the pandemic began, and that is the record of this government. Labour, never forget, Mr. Speaker, there's never been a Labour government that left office with unemployment lower than when they entered. Check that out, Mr. Speaker.
Lots of words, lots of bluster, no answers. Word of warning. Word of warning, Prime Minister. That's not going to work with the police. I'll tell him why they're putting taxes up. Low growth. In the decade of Tory government before the pandemic, growth slumped. It was much, much weaker than under the last Labour government. If the Tories matched our record on growth, we would have £30 billion more to spend on public services without having to raise a single tax. Mr. Speaker, surely even this Prime Minister doesn't need someone else to tell him that he and the Chancellor are having to raise taxes because the Tories failed to grow the economy over a decade.
No, Mr. Speaker, I think everybody in this country can see that we've been through the biggest pandemic since for 100 years, that we've looked after the people of this country to the tune of £400 billion, that we've put into furlough and all the other schemes, 11.7 million people protected. Everybody knows the cost of that, Mr. Speaker. And at the same time, in spite of all the difficulties that we have faced, we have now got the fastest growth in the G7. Absolutely true. We've got youth unemployment. We've got youth unemployment at a record low, Mr. Speaker. We've got 3 times as much tech investment coming into this country as there is in France, twice as much as there is in Germany. Yes, that's absolutely true, Mr. Speaker. And never forget, if you want to know about Labour economics, never forget the last time they were in office, Mr. Speaker, when they were finally booted out, they left a note saying there's no money left. That's the way they run the country, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the UK...
Some people won't be getting more because they won't be here to hear it, so Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the UK has suffered the worst economic crisis in the G7. The Prime Minister has more chance of persuading the public that he didn't hold any parties than he has of persuading them that the economy is booming. High taxes are not just the result of low growth. Under this government, we've seen a pandemic of waste and fraud. From the Prime Minister's yacht to government contracts for mates of ministers, they've treated taxpayers as an ATM machine for their mates and their lifestyles. Now we find, Mr. Speaker, they've written off £8.7 billion on PPA, and the Chancellor's writing off £4.3 billion in fraud. That's enough to cover the tax hike he's inflicting on working people. So why did this government block the National Crime Agency from investigating all the billions they lost to fraud?
Mr. Speaker, of course we despise fraud and those who steal from the taxpayer, and that's why we've already recovered £743 million in lost furlough money, Mr. Speaker, £2.2 billion that was stolen in bounce-back loans, and we will go on. But I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that I am proud of what this government and this country did in securing record quantities of PPE and record time, Mr. Speaker, in furloughing and looking after the entirety of British business and society in the way that we did, Mr. Speaker. And once again, Captain Hindsight comes to this House and attacks the government for doing exactly what he urged us to do 18 months ago. Mr. Speaker, it so happens that I found a letter. I've been rustling in my notes, Mr. Speaker. And I found a letter which I will place for your convenience in the House, in the library of the House, Mr. Speaker, from the Shadow Chancellor to my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Deluxe, suggesting that we could secure PPE supplies. This is on April the 22nd, 2020. Secure PPE supplies from from a theatrical costumier, and that we could get ventilators from a professional football agent, Mr. Speaker. No wonder under Labour, fraud was running at £21 billion per year, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud of what this government did to secure PPE, and I'm proud of the way we protected this country.
Keir Starmer. Who wants to be the first to leave? Please put your hand up, because I'm going to pick one of you. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister might want to sharpen how he answers questions under interview. He's going to need it in the next few weeks. Waste and low growth explain why we have high taxes, but they don't explain why it's always working people that are asked to pay more. Yesterday, he ordered his troops not to support a windfall tax on oil and gas companies. As a result, the country is missing out on over £1 billion we could have used to cut taxes on energy bills for working people. Today, he's ordering his troops to vote for tax cuts for banks. As a result, the country is missing out on another £1 billion we could have spent cutting taxes for working people. Why are the Chancellor and the Prime Minister protecting oil companies and bank profits while putting taxes up on working people?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, let's just get to the heart of what this is all about. This is all about dealing with the consequences of the biggest pandemic this country has seen, with an unprecedented economic crisis in which the state had to come forward and look after the people of this country to the tune of £408 billion. Everybody can see the fiscal impacts of that. Shall I tell you what this government and this country is voting for and what we're doing? We're investing now in 45,000 more NHS workers, more people in our NHS this year than there were last year. 10,000 more nurses, 10,900 more nurses, about 5,000 more doctors, Mr. Speaker, 9 million more scans, 100 community diagnostics hubs to help people to get the scans and treatment they need. And the incredible thing, the lamentable thing is that the party opposite, the party of Nye Bevan, Mr. Speaker, voted against those funds, voted against that investment, and they would have made our COVID recovery impossible.
What? Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, for all the bluster, the truth is the Conservative Party are the party of high taxes because they're the party of low growth. They are the party of high taxes because they're the party of eye-watering waste. Mr. Speaker, we know this Prime Minister has no respect for decency or honesty. I can take it when it's aimed at me, but I won't accept it when he gaslights the British public, writing absurd articles about cutting taxes at a time when he's squeezing working people to the pips. Isn't it the case, Mr. Speaker, that he and his Chancellor are the Tory Thelma and Louise, hand in hand, as they drive the country off the cliff and into the abyss of low growth and tax?
Mr. Gullis, I think you've been trailed for long enough and you don't want to be trailed anymore. And that is the last comment I have, or otherwise I will ring your mother. Keir Starmer.
Isn't it true, Mr Speaker, that he and the Chancellor, the Tory Thelma and Louise, hand in hand as they drive the country off the cliff and into the abyss of low growth and high tax?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I think the right honourable gentleman is Dick Dastardly and Muttley. Both of them pulling in different directions. We know they have different views, Mr Speaker. We are getting on with the job, Mr Speaker, and just in the last few days, and of course, I think it's absolutely extraordinary that they've done nothing to support our COVID recovery plan. They've voted against our plans to support the NHS. But what we're doing, just in the last few days, while he's been fixated on the issues that he's absolutely determined to escalate, what we've done, we've opened free ports across the country just in the last few days. We're getting 500,000 people off welfare into work with our Way to Work plan. In just a few short minutes, Mr Speaker, I hope he will hang around, because he will hear my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, deliver the long-awaited Levelling Up white paper, full of good stuff, including 55 education investment areas across our country. A wonderful moral and economic mission to level up and give opportunity across the whole country. A fantastic vision for this country, Mr Speaker. They have nothing of the kind to offer the people of this country. Mr Speaker, while we are getting on with coming out of COVID with the fastest economic recovery in the G7, the fastest, he would have kept us in lockdown, Mr Speaker. We're fixing the NHS and social care when they voted against it, and they have no plan. And we are, well, Mr Speaker, we are building a coalition.
Just a minute. Prime Minister, I'm this way, not that way. Maybe Specsavers might be the answer to see where I am. And can I just say, Dame Caroline Dinage is desperate to get the next question to you. Dame Diana Caroline Dinage.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'd like to first of all give my condolences to the Right Honourable Member for Camberwell and Peckham and say how good it is to see her back in her place. Mr Speaker, Sophie Farrell was just 10 years old when she died in September. Childhood cancer is often described as rare, yet cancer is the biggest killer of children under 14. Sophie's GP failed to diagnose her cancer, and it was only when she went to A&E that they discovered the tumour in her little body that was 12 centimetres long. So, Mr Speaker, on World Cancer Day on Friday, I would like to ask the Prime Minister to please advocate for more and better training for general practice to identify cancer in children.
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable. I'm very sorry to hear of Sophie's case, and my thoughts are with her family and her friends. And she's right that research is crucial in tackling childhood cancers. That's why we're investing in more research. But it's also vital that we do tests and diagnostic scans and screens early enough, and that's why it's also important that NICE has not only updated its guidance on referring childhood cancers in February last year, but we're investing in 100 new diagnostic centres in community hubs.
I now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'm sure that you and the rest of the House will want to join me in celebrating and supporting World Cancer Day. Mr Speaker, just in relation to your earlier statement, I have a difficulty reconciling the Prime Minister's version of events with other evidence, and as you know, I have a duty to reflect and represent the deep, deep public anger with the Prime Minister. That said, Mr Speaker, I respect the absolute impartiality that you take in your role, and I want to set on the record that I respect both you and the authority of the Chair. Mr Speaker, this morning the Telegraph newspaper revealed that the Prime Minister attended a party in his flat on the 13th of November 2020. The Prime Minister previously told the House that no party took place. The police are now investigating this party, and we face a very real prospect of a sitting Prime Minister being questioned under caution and being fined in office. And if he is questioned, Mr. Speaker, he must go. If he's fined, he must resign. Mr. Speaker, you'll agree that the House should not be treated with contempt. So can the Prime Minister... here we go again. So can the Prime Minister update the House on his whereabouts on the evening of the 13th of November? Surely, Mr. Speaker, he doesn't need to wait for an investigation to tell us exactly where he was.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, here we go again, says the right honourable gentleman opposite, and I must say those are entirely my feelings. He asked exactly the same questions as I recall in the chamber a few days ago. He knows, Mr. Speaker, that the process must go on, but I can tell him what's been going on in Downing Street, Mr. Speaker. In November and throughout, we've been delivering the fastest vaccine and booster rollout anywhere in Europe. We've been getting people back into work, Mr. Speaker. We've been getting people back into work, Mr. Speaker, and we've been helping to bring the West together to defy what I think is completely unacceptable threats and intimidation from the Putin regime against Ukraine. And that's what we've been doing.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, that was a disgraceful response. And I have to say to the Prime Minister, he should read the room and he should see some of the faces on his colleagues' faces. He has lost it. Mr. Speaker, we've now reached the ridiculous scenario of a Prime Minister who can't even tell us where he was. He lives in a world where he thinks everything is owed to him, and he never pauses to think what he owes to the public. The Prime Minister is now a dangerous distraction at home and a running joke on the international stage. What does it tell the Prime Minister and the public that in the morning that he has returned from Ukraine, the chair of the Defence Select Committee has submitted a letter of no confidence in him?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it tells me that it is more vital than ever for the government of this country to get on with the job, deliver our COVID recovery plan, and that is what we are doing.
Virginia Crosby.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to say thank you to the Prime Minister for visiting my Honest Mourne constituency, where he saw firsthand the enormous beneficial impact a new nuclear plant will know it could have if built on Anglesey. Nuclear power must play a role if we are to meet our carbon and net zero commitments, level up and combat rising energy prices. Does my right honourable friend agree that the rapid deployment of nuclear technology must be a priority for this government? And if so, will my right honourable friend commit to financing a nuclear plant at the Wilver site this Parliament?
Well, it was a great joy to visit my honourable friend's constituency, where I believe she is known as Atomic Kitten, or so she informed me, Mr. Speaker, and she outlined in great detail her plans for Wilfer. It's a fantastic vision, a fantastic site, and it remains a very interesting and attractive prospect for new nuclear power.
Colin Eastman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure if the Prime Minister has noticed, but while he's been partying, working families in Northern Ireland have lost £1,000 from their universal credit. Their national insurance has been put up by this government, and their energy bills are going through the roof. He's very fond of telling us that we're all in this together. Isn't it the truth, Mr. Speaker, that this Prime Minister has only ever been in it for himself and his rich mates?
No, Mr. Speaker, I'm in it to serve my country and the entire United Kingdom. And I'm also proud that we've had the biggest investment in Northern Ireland since devolution began, and we've cut taxation on universal credit.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. South Western Railway has totally cut off Dorset, Somerset, most of Wiltshire and Devon from its direct rail services to London, as well as slashing our service in half, most of which is totally unnecessary. Will my right honourable friend support me and my neighbouring colleagues in getting direct services back to West Dorset and having a timetable that's fit for our region?
Prime Minister.
I want to thank my honourable friend very much for his question, and he knows whereof he speaks. He's an expert in this subject, Mr. Speaker, and he's lobbied very effectively for his constituents and reflected their frustrations. And I'm told that the timetable is expected to return to December 2021 levels from Saturday, the 19th of February.
Alex Sherbel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was out this weekend speaking to a constituent who has a cold and leaky house. She has seen her bills already go up from £100 to £170 a month. The government have failed to insulate her house and failed to control her fuel bills. Bribing people with their own money is no plan. The Prime Minister has no plan to cut VAT, no plan to get the oil and gas industry to contribute. Another constituent who voted for the Prime Minister went further and called him despicable. What use is a Prime Minister who has no plan for families struggling with the cost of living and has lost the trust of the people of this country?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he talks about cutting VAT. I wonder whether he voted for Brexit and our ability to cut VAT. Perhaps he could indicate. Perhaps he could indicate, Mr. Speaker, what we're doing, which we delivered, Mr. Speaker, and whose anniversary we celebrated on Monday. And what we're doing, Mr. Speaker, is, and I sympathise very much with his constituent, and I understand the pressures that people are facing on the cost of living. But what we've got to do is invest in and then protect them, and we're putting £12 billion worth of support and financial help for families in hardship this year, and it's absolutely vital after the pandemic. But the most important thing is to have a jobs-led economic recovery. And in case I failed to make myself clear before you wound me up, Mr. Speaker, that's why we have the fastest economic growth in the G7.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Greater Manchester Mayoral Clean Air Zone scheme, effectively a congestion charge affecting all 500 square miles of Greater Manchester, including my constituents in Lee, is a job-destroying tax on ordinary workers. We all want clean air, but the model proposed by Mayor Burnham is unworkable and economically devastating. With charges of £60 per day per lorry driver. Taxis, white van men, even buses will be caught by it. Will the PM intervene to prevent Mayor Burnham from inflicting this disastrous Labour scheme on Greater Manchester?
I know from my own experience how vital it is when you're trying to clean up air in a great city that you do not unjustly penalise business, and particularly small businesses. And it's become clear that the scheme proposed by the Labour Mayor in Manchester is completely unworkable, will do more damage to businesses and residents in Manchester. So we must find an alternative, Mr. Speaker, that doesn't punish local residents. And my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for the Environment, will be saying more about this in the coming days.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Prime Minister receives a penalty-fixed notice for attending a party or hosting a party during lockdown, will he inform the House and will he resign?
Yes. Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, of course I will comply with the law, but I've got to wait for the process to be concluded.
Ian Levy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since being elected, my fabulous constituency of Blythe Valley is really seeing the green shoots of prosperity. Government support is a green revolution in Blythe Valley. However, with such growth, the increased congestion on our roads, we are in desperate need of upgrades to the road infrastructure. Would my right honourable friend please meet with me to discuss the urgent problem and help Blythe Valley out of the ever-increasing traffic jam? Thank you.
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is the best champion that Blythe could possibly have. And he does does a quite amazing job, and I want to thank him in particular, Mr. Speaker, for helping to secure the British Volt gigafactory in Brighton. Absolutely amazing investment, and I understand that, of course, growth and prosperity bring their challenges when it comes to congestion on our roads. We have to tackle that. We're working with the Council on a bid for the Blythe Relief Road, and I'll make sure that my honourable friend gets a meeting with the Transport Secretary to discuss it further.
Rachel Bascom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The problem with a distracted Prime Minister is that he makes the wrong choices. While he's been living it up, many of my constituents are living on the breadline as food, energy and taxes shoot up. In York, the rent prices are the highest now in the north and some of the highest in the country. And York is now in the top 10 places in the country where there is a cost of living crisis, pushing my constituents further into poverty and debt. So when is he going to stop protecting himself and start protecting my constituents?
So, Mr. Speaker, one of the first things I did when I became Prime Minister was to ensure that we looked after people on low incomes by increasing local housing allowance, Mr. Speaker, by increasing the living wage, not once but twice, and by record amounts, Mr. Speaker, and of course by doing what we've now done with universal credit. But the most important, I really think the House needs to get this, but the most important thing about the UK economy right now is that we have a strong jobs-led recovery, and that is what is going to drive up wages and drive up productivity and drive up growth, and that is what this government is delivering.
So Desmond Swain.
Will he brief us on his visit to Ukraine?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend very much, and in very briefly, Mr. Speaker, I can tell the House that the mission was to, as I hope everybody will support, was to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine, for the House, for our country to show that we stand with the people of Ukraine and we stand for the sovereign and territorial integrity of Ukraine at a very difficult time, because there are on the borders of Ukraine, as everybody knows, about 125,000 Russian troops massing. The situation is very perilous. And the job of the UK is to lead the West in bringing together the most important countries in creating a package of economic sanctions that will deter President Putin from what I believe would be a disastrous miscalculation, and also to strengthen our support for the Ukrainian people and indeed the Ukrainian army. And we're doing that. We're supplying lethal but defensive weaponry as well as training to the Ukrainians. And that is greatly appreciated. But I must say that the situation remains risky, Mr. Speaker, and it is vital that diplomacy finds a way forward.
Thomas.
Mr. Speaker, on a related issue, after the publication of the Russia report, the Prime Minister claimed tackling illicit finance and driving dirty money and money launderers out of the UK is a priority. His warnings to Mr. Putin of late would surely have carried more bite if he'd actually used the 18 months since publication of the Russia report to legislate for an economic crime act to stop the flow of dirty money for Russia. Why hasn't he prioritised this issue of national security?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, contrary to some of the myths that are peddled, this government has come down very hard on dirty money from Russia and everywhere else. That's why we brought in the unexplained wealth orders and indeed China, Mr. Speaker, which they might like to consider. That's why we have sanctions on Russia following what they did in Crimea in 2014. We have Magnitsky sanctions on everybody involved in the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. And to his point, Mr. Speaker, we are bringing forward the economic crime bill so that it will take place, it will be voted on in the third session of this Parliament.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite the best efforts of the opposition, 2 years ago this week, this government delivered the democratic decision to leave the European Union. And despite there being a global pandemic in the 2 years since, over 70 free trade agreements have been signed. However, as we recover, there are many more opportunities that can be realised. So will the Prime Minister commit to appointing a minister responsible for realising those Brexit freedoms and benefits that will boost all of our constituencies.
Mr. Speaker, you can hear from the chuntering opposite that they still want to take this thing back. They still want to cancel Brexit, Mr. Speaker. But it was thanks to Brexit very largely that we had the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, Mr. Speaker, and we've been able to deliver our free ports, Mr. Speaker, and we've been able to do 60 or 70 free trade deals around the world. And yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to anticipate any decisions I may make about the government, but I certainly think it would be a good idea to have a minister driving that post-Brexit agenda.
Thank you. Let's just recap, Mr. Speaker. Before we were told we must wait for the Sue Gray report, then we were told we must wait for the police investigation to conclude. There was no party, and then if there was a party, I wasn't there. Then, well, if there was a party, then all rules were followed. But no one, Prime Minister, believes you. And if any of the above were true, why did Allegra Stratton have to resign?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I explained that sad matter on the floor of the House, and nobody wanted Allegra to resign, and I was very sad that she did.
Simon Jupp.
Thank you. My constituent, Ginty Sharon from Exmouth, has launched a campaign to get a dedicated menopause clinic in Devon. Women in East Devon currently face a 120-mile round trip to get to the nearest specialist menopause clinic. It's not good enough, is it?
No.
Will my right honourable friend outline what steps the government is taking to improve access to menopause services in Devon and the South West?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for raising this very important campaign, and we are committed to improving menopause care so that all women can have access to the support they need and to manage the symptoms. Menopause will be a priority within our women's health strategy, and we're committed to establishing a UK-wide menopause task force, Mr. Speaker.
Dame Angela Riedel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Prime Minister needs a Metropolitan Police inquiry to tell him whether he attended a party on the 13th of November in his own Downing Street flat, why should we believe that he's a fit and proper person to have his hand on the button of our independent nuclear deterrent?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I hesitate to remind the right honourable lady, but she campaigned actively to install a Prime Minister who wanted to get rid of our nuclear deterrent altogether.
Mark Isworth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister, the Government and our NHS have done an amazing job with the vaccine rollout, making it a resounding success. Would my right honourable friend join me in thanking the wonderful NHS workers, volunteers and pharmacies who have worked so hard to help make this possible in Dewsbury, Mirfield, Kirkburn and Denbydale?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, who does a fantastic job of representing his communities, and I want to thank all of them, Mr. Speaker, everybody involved in the rollout in Dewsbury, in Mirfield, in Kirkburton and in Denbydale, Mr. Speaker, because it was an extraordinary national effort, and anybody who visited a vaccine centre will know that feeling of pride in what was happening, that feeling of energy in a collective effort to make our society and our country literally healthier day by day. And I thank all of them, Mr. Speaker, from the bottom of my heart.
That's the end of PMQ, so those who wish to leave, please do so quietly and quickly.